You have got to get into and talk to someone about what you went through in Iraq. And a single tear came from his eye, and he just looked at me and said, I can't.
So much of the anxiety and the stress is here at home and not really over there.
You try to de-escalate the situation so that they are able to see it more clearly and more realistic. There are thoughts that are stuck in your head, and they are unrealistic.
In order to really help somebody, you got to get in their shoes, and getting in their shoes, that's a lot of baggage to carry.
Then of course it becomes, I don't know who this person is anymore. The spouse, they deal with depression, they deal with anxiety.
You want to know why there's so many veterans that are getting denied VA benefits, because I wonder how many actually did follow through with those really bad recommendations from very top leaders, and now the veteran can't prove that they did have a diagnosis while they were active duty.
We don't understand what it's like for you to have been over there any more than you guys can understand what it's like for us to be here.
Right.
You guys know that you're alive. We have to wait for a phone call and email.
Welcome back to the Today with Tally podcast, folks. We have a great show in store for you today. We will sit down with a marriage and family therapist that specializes in helping military spouses cope with secondary trauma. Now, military spouses are often overlooked and forgotten. And this next guest that we have is going to share not only her own personal testimony, but what she's doing actively in her community and abroad to help those who serve. But first.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of Today with Tally. The mission and goal of this podcast is to bring an engaging conversation that will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and search Today with Tally. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the program as well. Ladies and gentlemen, your host of the evening, Mr. Brian Tally.
Our next guest, believe it or not, is the wife of a great friend of mine, Chris Whittemore, who is a U.S. Marine combat veteran. And now let me tell you a little bit about Christina. She's the daughter of Marine Vietnam veteran and the spouse of a wounded warrior Marine. Christina works with military and their families in providing therapy for them to help with their coping skills. Currently, she works as a marriage and family therapist to the military population and their families. She has been a military caregiver and experienced 3 combat deployments with her spouse. Christina is a attempt survivor after experiencing severe caregiver's fatigue. This incident is what prompted her to become a licensed therapist to help other spouses from having to go through the same experiences. Christina's passion is helping military spouses learn to cope with secondary trauma and caregiver burnout. I've been hearing that word a lot, lately about the burnout. So they don't experience what she went through. She has been married for over 20 years, and she is a proud dog mom to her 3 rescue babies. And with that, we are honored to be joined by Christina herself. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. When Chris reached out and said, would you consider having my wife on your podcast? I said, say when.
He's pretty great.
Great guy. You're lucky to have him. I know he's doing some big things in the veteran community. He's been on this show several times, talking about his book and talking about his combat experiences and what he's doing right now in serving the veteran population. So I'm not surprised with what you are doing. It seems like you guys both have hearts of gold, and that is definitely needed in this world that we're all living in right now.
Yeah. I grew up with a dad that was a Vietnam vet, and he went 40 years before he finally got help for his combat PTSD. And it was my husband going to Iraq that encouraged him to go get help for himself. And he's an amazing dad. I mean, he's really very different than how he was when we were growing up because of getting that help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, like back in the Vietnam era, and even back into World War II, they didn't. Post-traumatic stress was there, but it was never talked about it. But it was called something different. Like, I think it was called shell shock.
Shell shock was World War One, was World War II. World War One was, dang it, I knew all these terms. The term PTSD didn't get recognized until 1980 by the VA. And so, but it wasn't until Iraq and Afghanistan that a lot of the Vietnam vets started to go and get help. But even then, the caregivers and the spouses of the Vietnam vets weren't included in the VA resources for caregivers. And that just occurred within the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they see the behavior coming back from a lot of, wounded veterans, and they say, you know what, I feel the same exact way that guy does. And, and unfortunately, I've had to wait, 30, 40, 50 years to get my help. But here I am now, so I can live out the remainder of my life, perhaps, and, with a little bit of peace, and joy in my heart, and try to fight those demons off that we all do have. Again, living in this time that we're all living in, that seems as if war is surrounded us. And, there's wars that are striking up now, and it's like, we just got out of a 20-year war, and it looks like we're getting ready to get back into another one. And so what you are doing, there's so much value in it, because there's so many military spouses that get overlooked, and they are in the shadows, right? They're in the shadows. And what you guys do is you serve alongside the service member or the veteran. And people have got to understand that there is hope out there, and there are outlets and resources that can be tapped into to increase the quality of their life, so they can join groups, they can sit down and have conversations with you, they can get all of their baggage off their chest, and they'll have a friend.
Exactly.
Like you, when their spouse is deployed overseas and they're having a really hard time with the family, trying to maybe pay bills and take care of the babies at home, and just life can get really difficult. So I want to know, Christina, what inspired you to say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it, because I feel there's a need out there? What can I do?
For many, many years, even when my husband was active duty, I wanted to be involved. I got involved with the family readiness program. I was a family readiness what do they call us? Family readiness advisor for the enlisted spouses in my husband's air wing unit. The first two units were infantry. And he did a lap move over to the air wing side in 2008. And it was at that time when he was diagnosed with PTSD. And I knew the signs. I grew up with it with my dad. And I remember saying to my husband, you and I are going to go get some counseling, and you have got to get into and talk to someone about what you went through in Iraq. And a single tear came from his eye, and he just looked at me and said, I can't. And I knew at that point that there had to be so many other spouses that were going through things. And at that time, social media wasn't really prevalent. So, I think MySpace had just come out, but, there weren't Facebook and Twitter or X, whatever they call it now, and all these other outlets for spouses to go online and find. And we kept going and going, and we were on recruiting duty. We had just gotten to recruiting duty, and we got there at the beginning of May. And in July, we lost a very dear friend of ours, Trevor Cook, to a helicopter crash from his old unit. They were doing a training mission, and the chopper went down, crashed, and out of the 6 that were injured, Trevor was the only one that was killed. And then I think a month later, we lost one of our dogs to cancer. And then come that January, we started fertility treatments, and I got pregnant in April and had a miscarriage. And then we got stationed in East Texas, where my husband took over a recruiting office, and his PTSD was just getting worse and worse with every little trauma that was happening. And he didn't know how to be there for me. And so we were very distant from each other. And when he broke down and I saw all the harassment he was going through with his unit, I finally wrote a letter to the commandant's wife and the sergeant major of the Marine Corps at the time to get him the proper help. And that's how it started.
So I've got a question here. You saw the personal struggles of your husband when your life literally came crashing down around you. Nothing was going right. You had life issues over here, and now you have a husband that's battling post-traumatic stress. You guys draw apart. You have that distance, if you will. Obviously, he's not happy. You're not happy. And you go to him after you realize he needs help. Now, he said that I can't with that single tear. Was it he couldn't get the help he needed because he didn't want to help himself, or was he afraid of retribution and what may come once he received the help that he needed?
Well, what's interesting about that is he did try and go talk to somebody. We had just gotten to Camp Pendleton, and he was struggling so bad. And I finally convinced him to go get diagnosed, and he did. The problem was he had just done a lap move into the air wing side, and so he had to go through all this flight training. And the flight surgeon told him, you've got one of 2 options. You can either take the PTSD diagnosis out of your service record book and pretend like it never happened, or you can come off the medication for a year and be grounded from your training for a year. And I flat out told him, said, don't you dare take that out of your service record book. And so he was grounded from the flight training, and they had to do his training all out of order and everything. And that was in 2008, February 2008. He did not get any help after that until June or July of 2013.
How could that even be an option to remove that from somebody's medical record?
Good question. The stigma is there. And I guess the flight surgeon thought he could go in and take that out. But I told him, said, don't you dare do that. Yeah.
You want to know why there's so many veterans that are getting denied VA benefits, because I wonder how many actually did follow through, with those really bad recommendations from very top leaders, in their positions. And now the veteran can't prove that they did have a diagnosis while they were active duty. And now they've got to go through and between nexus letters and everything else to try to prove that, hey, look, I saw stuff I can't unsee. I've got these really hard issues that are affecting my day-to-day life. And again, you get VA denials, and then, you start talking about veterans, and,
and when he was going through his MEB, I sat down and started going through his service record book and everything, and his medical file and stuff. And when he came back from Iraq in 2006, they had them fill out these forms and these stupid checkboxes saying, yeah, I experienced this, I experienced that. If a person at the VA were looking at that, they would have thought he was at Disney World, because he didn't report anything. And I'm sorry, he was a scout sniper in Ramadi on that deployment. He saw a lot. And these guys are trained that, well, if you report this, you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to move forward. And that then puts stress on the family because the family has to deal with it in secret, hence the invisible wounds, and it destroys a lot of the relationships. I think at one point, I heard that the divorce rate at Camp Pendleton was like 85%. And when you think about, Chris gave his book to one of his friends that he knew, found the book online, didn't even realize that he knew Chris until he started reading, and he's like, oh my God, I know this guy. And he and his wife had been separated because of his PTSD. And he gave the book to his wife to read, and they are now working it out. It's all about the wives being able to understand the PTSD and know that the person that they love is still there. They're just being hidden with those invisible wounds, and they don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. I want to get into what it is you exactly do and how you can help our listeners out there that may be going through some of these same struggles that tens and thousands, if not more, other military spouses are currently going through, or veterans, the spouses of veterans. And now, again, I've said this many times, before, but I'm going to say it again. Spouses serve alongside the family member. It's a joint operation, if you will. But you are a marriage and family therapist. You specialize in helping military spouses. And again, a lot of that is helping them cope with secondary trauma. And you, out of all people, have been there. So what better person to help somebody that's going through this, that's affected by all these life challenges and obstacles, than somebody who has been there, right? And so how does this work? Are you virtual?
I am virtual only. Right now, I am licensed in Texas, so I can work with anybody that's in the state of Texas as far as from a therapy standpoint. I am also in the process of getting licensed in North Carolina. I want to be licensed everywhere where the Marine bases are, since, Marines are my passion. Not to saying I don't love other military spouses, but I am a Marine wife, so I can really relate to that. So when I am working with spouses or couples, the one main thing that you will find in any relationship, every single thing can be connected by communication. If you do not know how to properly communicate, that is going to be an issue with every other value you can think of, whether it's honesty, trust, loyalty, family, anything you can think of. It comes back to, do I know how to properly communicate with someone? And I remember being told that when I was going through my graduate program, and I thought, no, there's got to be something else, And Chris and I, we went to 3 different therapists before we found one that worked, and it was a marriage and family therapist. So the way we work is we look at things from a systemic point of view. It's not a situation where, well, because you did this, this is occurring. We look at what the problems are in the relationship, and we look at the outside factors that actually come into it, and look at what it really is the problem. And a lot of it does come back to communication, but it's also about if the spouse has gone through a lot of trauma, secondary trauma, because of the service member. It's a matter of trying to find ways to mend that. Now, it is important that the spouse and the veteran, they need to have 2 separate individual therapists. I could see them as a couple, or I could see one or the other. I don't overlap. And I do that so that I can make sure that they are not, one, confidentiality is not breached. You want to make sure that when you are speaking to your client, you're able to be real with them. And I never work harder than my clients, and I will tell them that. I want to make sure that what they put into therapy is what they're going to get out of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I pull no punches. I am very blunt. I am literally an open book. Obviously, my husband wrote about our life together. So, my life is out there. So my clients know that I am real, but I never ask my clients to do anything that I wouldn't do. And I let them know at the very beginning, this is a slow process, and you can take 10 steps forward and then you all of a sudden take 8 steps back. When you're dealing with PTSD, it's one of those things that it's a long term. Now, there are therapy modalities, like for the trauma part, I work with cognitive processing therapy. And that basically looks at how our thoughts and our beliefs impact us within ourselves, others, and how we view society and the world. And that's been shown to be, it's an evidence-based treatment for veterans, for trauma in general, but it's also been shown to be very effective for veterans. Now, I do contract with Mission Ready Counseling, and there's the other therapists that are there. They're all connected to the military or first responders in some way, shape, or form. I believe all of them right now are military spouses, and then we have one that is a prior law enforcement. And so there's other therapy modalities for trauma that we can work with other therapists there. But me personally, I do the CPT.
Gotcha. Now, I've got a question. You said that you use the cognitive process therapy. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Sure. So it can be anywhere from, it's a minimum of 6 sessions. It can go up to 12, 24. It really depends on the pace that you go at. Now, there's 2 different cognitive therapies. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very well used. That one looks at the behaviors. Cognitive processing therapy looks at our thoughts and our beliefs. So what we look at is we ask the client to write at least one page statement of describing your most traumatic event. But when you're describing it, it's about why you think it happened. It's not where we are wanting you to deal with any kind of re-traumatizing. So when we are doing CPT, we ask them to write about why they believe that occurred and why they believe that affected them the most. And then from there, we also ask them to look at a few different categories of how thoughts and the beliefs of the trauma has affected them. And we ask them to look at how it's affected their beliefs with themselves, others, and the world. So we start off with looking at how their beliefs have affected them personally, and then we expand on that. And as we go through it, we look at what's called stuck points. Stuck points, I would say, are kind of like triggers. They're thoughts that are stuck in your head, and they are unrealistic. So what we do with CPT is we take these unrealistic stuck points and we help them to reconfigure them into more realistic thoughts and beliefs so that they are able to be more productive and healthy in their relationships.
And what are some of the top issues that you're seeing with military and veteran spouses?
Well, a lot of it is, the isolation. The vets don't want to do anything, or they have a lot of anger built up. And a lot of the vets, they drink. It's alcohol. And then, of course, it becomes, I don't know who this person is anymore. The spouse, they deal with depression, they deal with anxiety. I know for me, I felt like I was always walking on eggshells. Chris and I would go to bed at night, and instead of going to sleep, I would stay up all night until I knew he was okay, because there were times where I'd wake up and he would be leaning over me. There was one night I woke up and his hand was coming over my face and I just froze in fear. And all of a sudden he just falls back onto the bed. So, a lot of military spouses, when we're dealing with our service members, our loved ones dealing with PTSD, we can't make plans. You live on a day-to-day basis of not knowing what to expect.
Now, the help that you provide, what exactly is the end game here for the folks that you help? Because, you're dealing with, say, a military spouse one-on-one. Now, are you feeding some sort of like recommendations on how to move forward? Because, we all know, look, veterans and folks that are active duty military, if they're going through some issues, they're never going to find the help they need until they hit rock bottom. But a lot of folks don't know they even have a problem. Okay. Right. So that's where it first lies right there. Now, how do you get across in trying to basically counsel, not only probably in a godly way, but in a professional way, being, somebody who's been through all this stuff too, in a meaningful way for them to make good, rational decisions and not really lose their marriage?
I really encourage the people that I work with to let them know that there is an end to it. And well, let me clarify that there is an alternate way of getting through things. When I get clients that come to me and they're at their wits' end, they don't know what to do. I had one spouse that I worked with, and she would come to the sessions and she would sit and cry for so many of them when we first started working together. And it's about helping them find their footing. Because as a military spouse, you kind of lose your identity and you lose that control and you lose that independence of being able to do what you want because of unexpected changes and schedules and deployments and all that stuff. So it's a matter of helping them work on themselves as an independent person. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just, go ahead.
I already forgot what I was going to say.
My bad. Yeah, there's just so much information here that I just want to divulge in because it's very, this is my wheelhouse. I love getting information like this out because there's so many people out there that are suffering. Of course, the podcasts out there that, people want to hear, crazy stories of resilience and perseverance and war stories and all the really spicy stuff. Right. I think this stuff here is very, very, very valuable and meaningful to so many folks out there. Even if it doesn't pertain to them, if they're listening, they will know somebody that this information would pertain to. Right. And that's why I have a lot of, respect for folks like you that are going out and that are getting into some really messy work, because I can only understand the anxiety that's behind it, because I get so many people reaching out to me, and in order to really help somebody, you got to get in their shoes, and getting in their shoes, that's a lot of baggage to carry. So you got to know how to bring in the baggage, get in the frame of mind in order to help somebody, and then to release the baggage. And I know that that's very difficult to do. Now, we've talked about some of the post-traumatic stress and some of the issues like alcohol abuse that are triggering events in some of these issues that are going on with some of the spouses that are reaching out to you saying, hey, look, I don't know my husband anymore. He's been through war. He's got post-traumatic stress really bad. He's hitting the bottle. I'm afraid, what he could do to himself or somebody else. I need help. He needs help, but he doesn't want it. So you're involved in all that. Now, what about, say, you got that 18-year-old PFC getting out of boot camp, and, a lot of Marines get married very early on. He's got a brother. And you got two 18-year-olds out there, and a year later, that 19-year-old, say Lance Corporal, is going overseas for 6 months, and he's leaving his new bride back in, say, Lejeune or Pendleton. Now, understanding the regimented rules of the United States Marine Corps and the lifestyle it brings could be very hard for maybe an 18, 19-year-old new wife to understand.
Right.
Do you help folks like them as well?
I will help any military family. Whether you're a newly bride at 18, the great thing about the Marine Corps, and I don't know about the other branches, but the Marine Corps has a program called LINKS, and it's lifestyles, insight, networking, knowledge, and skills. And it's a class that's offered through the Marine Corps Family Team Building. And it's basically a history of the Marine Corps, what it's like to be part of the culture, the meanings around like the uniform and everything you can think of. And I used to, I was a volunteer and would help teach that. And it was very informative for new spouses that aren't really familiar with what military life is like. Now, there are some spouses that don't embrace the military lifestyle. They want to maintain, more of a civilian life, and that's great. But you're still going to be impacted by the military culture in one way or another, whether it's through deployments, or PCSing to another base. You're still going to be involved in it, but it's those spouses that really rebel against it that really have a harder time understanding the combat trauma and the PTSD, because they didn't really allow themselves to be part of that.
Now, understanding the military lifestyle is very difficult for a lot of civilians, especially those that are new to it, that are coming in, that are married into it. And, there's so much real life out there. It's raw, it's vulnerable. There's so many different avenues, that you could go down, that could be, either, successful or, running into a brick wall. And there's so many spouses out there that feel as if they're alone. Like, nobody will understand me. No one will understand what I'm going through.
Right.
And so that's where a Christina can come in and say, no, you're wrong. Sit down and let me counsel you. Now, do you see a lot of your clients are keeping secrets away from their spouses, getting the help that they need in fear of maybe their spouse may say, you don't need help. What are you talking about? I'm fine.
Yes and no. Typically when we're dealing with the spouses, at some point the spouse gets to where, they kind of throw their hands up and figure, I've got to do something. I don't know what, but I've got to do something. So they'll go to counseling. The issue that we run into with a lot of military spouses is, with the military only being 1% of the population, there's not that many counselors and therapists out there that are that knowledgeable about how to work within the military culture. I was going through it really bad when Chris was in treatment, and I needed to talk to somebody. I needed a counselor, and they referred me to an MFLAC, which is somebody that you can go see on a base, and they don't take notes. It's not reported back to any commands or anything. It's more just someone that you can kind of sit and bounce your feelings and such off of. And so I go in there and try to find, have an appointment made. I go in, I sit down, and this particular MFLAC is on an Army base, because that's where the Wounded Warrior Battalion for the Marine Corps was an annex here in San Antonio. And rather than helping me, she starts quizzing me on Marine Corps life and deployments and this and that. And I'm thinking, you're supposed to be helping me. I'm not supposed to be educating you. I'm sitting here crying and you're asking me these questions. So it's real hard. It's very hard to find those counselors that are really knowledgeable. And so what I want to start doing is find a way to research and reach out to therapists that actually work with military spouses, not necessarily the veterans, but the spouses. And I want to be able to provide that on my webpage as a resource so that anyone that comes to my page can go under the military family resources link and see that there are counselors in all 50 states for them to be seen by. And I think that's something that's really needed. You know, I think there needs to be some sort of a directory for military spouse therapists.
Agreed. Yeah. And, you know, and you're a champion in this arena, and, you know, definitely need a lot more Christinas out there. Again, I see it every single day. And again, there's so many people out there that feel as if they are alone when they aren't alone. And sometimes just getting that reassurance, this is okay, I'm not crazy. Like, this does happen to so many other different families out there, but it's just not talked about around the dinner table, perhaps, or, you know, out at your kids', you know, soccer game or baseball game, as everybody wants to put on this happy face and act as if everything is fine and dandy, when possibly in the house it's not.
Right. I mean, I had a best friend since high school, and we had been friends for, I don't even know how many years at that point. And when Chris went into treatment, I called her and I told her, I'm like, oh my God, Chris has told me that he had been suicidal for so many weeks, blah, blah, blah. And she blew up at me. And I'm thinking to myself, you're supposed to be my best friend and I need support in this. But she was civilian. And she hated whenever I would talk about his deployments. She couldn't understand, or she wasn't able to handle it, one or the other. And after being friends for so many years, we cut ties. She was not able to understand it. And so it is very common for military spouses to cut off ties with past friends because they don't understand.
Yeah. They don't understand the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to get back to the cognitive process therapy, because you said something that really piqued my interest.
Okay.
You were talking about, you know, you treat these individuals and you ask them like how they see the world, like how they perceive reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what their thoughts are and what their beliefs are.
Mm-hmm.
What type of information do some of your clients share with you? Because I'm really interested in how some of your clients are seeing today's world and what they think. And I mean, because it's very, since the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, there's been a lot of veterans out there that are very uneasy. And I know it's led to a lot of hardship inside homes and a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to know what some of these realities are that you are seeing from your clients and some of the things that they're talking about.
So it really depends on the trauma. For individuals, say, that have dealt with sexual abuse, they may say, I am not safe anywhere. For combat, it's I can't trust anyone. It's stuck points are very concise and they're very black and white, so they're very specific. And so when we're looking at the different categories, like for example, we look at esteem, safety, trust, intimacy. You know, those are a few of the categories that we look at in cognitive processing therapy. And we ask them, you know, what are your beliefs about yourself regarding safety? What are your beliefs about yourself regarding intimacy? and we take a look at all of those. And we take all those triggers or stuck points and we apply them to their everyday life. And the way we do that is when we get triggered and a stuck point comes into our head, we have what's called an ABC sheet. And the ABC sheet, you've got your activating event, you have your belief, and then you have your consequence. And when the activating event occurs, you indicate, okay, what was it that triggered me? So let's say we have a veteran that's driving down the road and there's something in the road and they swerve so they don't hit it. So that would be their triggering event, seeing something in the road. Their belief may be it's an IED, it's going to explode. Anything that's in the road is dangerous. Okay, so that could be their belief. The consequence of that is you're identifying your primary emotions. Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it sadness, guilt? Whatever the emotion is, that is your consequence. And you identify how that emotion makes you feel. What I do is when they identify those emotions, I have them rate that on a scale of 1 to 10 so that I have an idea of which of these emotions they are feeling the most and which ones really take over in those times. Once you do that, then you look at, is that belief realistic or is it helpful? Now, if you're believing that everything in the road is a bomb, that's not really realistic and it's definitely not helpful. So I help them to get to a place where they can think more realistically about what that could be. Okay, so rather than everything in the road is a bomb, they could reword it and say, whatever was in the road was probably just trash or could just be trash. You try to de-escalate the situation so that they are able to see it more clearly and more realistic.
Wow, I've never heard anything explained in that fashion, and it makes complete sense to me now.
And we continue doing that. And so you get into the habit of doing these ABC sheets. And the thing about CPT is every week grows on the previous week. And you move at the pace of your client. If they are still continuingly to really struggle, keep doing those ABC sheets. And then what we do is we take it and we dissect it even more. And we take those stuck points that we came up with and we start going down this list. Okay, is it an exaggerated belief? Is it unrealistic? And there's a bunch of different questions that we go down and we dissect it even further. So by the time we finish with the first 6 sessions, we have really dissected those stuck points regarding ourselves. After we finish session 6 of the CPT, then you go on to focusing on how you see others in the world doing the exact same thing we did through 1 through 6, and we implement those same steps with others in the world.
So going back to, say, the veteran or the active duty military service member, driving down the road, seeing the trash, oh, it's an IED, and it could bring back perhaps some traumatic type flashbacks. What's the percentage of times from your own, experience that maybe some of those veterans stop their day and maybe they go right to alcohol, or they say, all right, I've had enough for the day. I've got to go home and I've got to take my pills because I'm experiencing anxiety right now and I'm really jumpy. I'm on edge. I'm angry. Perhaps, they lost, their best friend in combat because he was the driver and there was some things that happened. I mean, there's so many stories out there.
There are.
That haven't been told and because a lot of the isolation and a lot of the survivor's guilt. out there. And when you get into their heads, what do they do next?
I teach mindfulness. I am a big believer in mindfulness. And one of the biggest things that I teach them is known as the five senses. So it is a way to help ground yourself by using your five senses. You can do it in any order, as many as you want. Typically it's like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And when you do that exercise, if you do it methodically, and what I mean by methodically is you sit there and you're trying to pay attention to things that you may not normally pay attention to. So say, for example, you walk into a grocery store and they are just inundated because there's so many people there and the crowd is overwhelming to them. You get them to slow themselves down, practice some deep breathing, and have them start doing, 5 things you can see. And when I say that, I'm talking about things that you are having to really focus on to pick out. So say you walk into an HEB and, you obviously see all the food, all the cashiers and stuff, but what are 5 things that you don't typically see or pay attention to? And those are the things that you point out. And by the time you get down to 1, theoretically, you've grounded yourself and calmed yourself down so that you're able to continue.
Yeah, these triggering and these crisis events can happen anywhere at any time.
Absolutely.
You're driving down the road, you're walking into the grocery store and everything's great and you're having a great mood, and all of a sudden, your body says there's something wrong. That's the anxiety, that's the post-traumatic stress that's involved in life. And I do suffer greatly from anxiety and depression, although on the outside it doesn't look like it, but I most certainly do. And it's something that I deal with on a daily basis. And I hid it for years. And now I talk about it. And I think being vulnerable is important in saving lives. And, if we save one, we've done our job. But the mission here is to save many. It saves as many people as we possibly can, because there's a better way out there for people to go through some of life's toughest challenges and obstacles, and then to become that success story, right? Like, Christina, do you have a success story that you could share with us today?
Let me see.
And I know you're new with this.
I'm trying to think of a good one to tell you. That one client that I was speaking about earlier, that her husband had PTSD, and she would come to the sessions and cry nonstop. I worked with her probably about 1.5 years, and she made such progress. And the thing about her was she was in the process of getting her citizenship. And so with the stressors with the marriage and not being able to work, she was a doctor in her home country. So she was having to go through the tests and everything here in the States to start all over. And so she had all these anxieties that were separate from the PTSD. And here's the kicker. She was not with her husband when he went through his deployments. And those spouses tend to struggle the most because they didn't go through the military stuff with them, so they don't understand it. So for her, she would come to session and she would cry and cry. And I would help her get to where she was able to function on her own. And she eventually graduated from therapy. And she was in the process of studying for her tests, and she was waiting for her citizenship to come back. She was doing really well.
Yeah. And you're so right. If you don't go through these experiences together, you'll never really understand where the other side's coming from unless you live it.
Right.
And, again, you're feeling that gap there, and you're educating, both sides really to come together and say, hey, look, your spouse went through a lot of stuff, and, and I have too. And Christina, you didn't serve in the military, but you served alongside your honorable husband, who served many years in the United States Marine Corps in combat, from being a sniper in Ramadi to being a door gunner in a helo. So you know that, you experienced it, you lived it. Is it possible for a military spouse to also share the same post-traumatic stress as their spouse?
Yes. Secondary trauma is very real. It's something that in the last few years, I think, has become a little bit more prevalent. And I think a lot of it is because people are seeing the effects of what it's like to be in a traumatic relationship. And that secondary trauma can be really horrible. I know for me, I started having this recurring dream. And it was about, Chris being in Iraq and, all this other stuff. And it kept progressing every dream I would have. And it finally got to the point, because it was so real, I finally got to the point where I had to ask Chris, did this really happen? Oh. Because it was just taking over my thoughts all the time. And every once in a while, I'll still have that happen. And at this point, I'll tell him about it and we're able to laugh about it. But at the time, it was very traumatizing for me because it affected my sleep, my energy, and taking care of him and dealing with the depression that I was dealing with at the time. It can be very, very severe at times. It's something to really take seriously.
Oh, absolutely. It's extremely exhausting. And going through and living through those types of events, and just knowing how real those dreams were, that you had to pick up the phone and say, is this going on? Am I going to lose you? And you're so worried that, what they say too, and a lot of spouses here back home go through almost more anxiety because they're so concerned about their loved one that they don't see and have hands on. But meanwhile, Chris is overseas right now, and he's sitting, inside the wire having chow, playing some cards with his buddies, and everything's okay. But you don't see that at that point. You're like, oh my God, at any moment I can get a phone call here, And so they say a lot of the times, so much of the anxiety and the stress is here at home and not really over there.
I tell my spouses, and I tell the vets too, we don't understand what it's like for you to have been over there any more than you guys can understand what it's like for us to be here.
Right.
You guys know that you're alive. We have to wait for a phone call, an email, whatever the case is. And I remember one day I was watching, I was watching Army Wives on Lifetime, and Chris was sitting next to me, and in the scene, Denise finds out that her husband was okay after being missing in action for a few days, and she shuts the door and she just collapsed to the ground and starts crying. And my husband said, is that really what it's like for you guys to really have to stress like that? I'm like, yeah. When he was in Ramadi, I was getting ready for bed. It was around 9-10 o'clock at night. I had my computer next to me, my phone next to me. And of course, we're talking about the fact that it's 2005. And so there's not social media. And someone knocks on my door and I about lose it. And so I'm walking down these stairs, almost like I'm in a horror movie, going super slow. And my porch light was out and I could barely see outside, and you couldn't see who it was. And I opened the door and it was a pizza delivery guy at the wrong house. And I'm like, do you have any idea what you just did to me? So you don't forget those things, and you think about that anytime you don't hear from him. So
it is the fear of the unknown And
Very much so.
and you know, like you describe, I can hear it in your voice that like you are living day to day, just waiting for that phone call and trying to almost mentally prepare yourself for it. And that's not healthy. And talk about post-traumatic stress. Yes,
Right.
folks, very real, especially when it comes to a military spouse. And they go through it just like the ones that they are married to. You know, like I said, it is a joint effort here. You got to go through it both at the same exact time. Christina, look, this has been great. I think we've really divulged in a lot of this information that you know we talked about today. How can people connect with you?
So I have my website. You can reach me at 2 different websites. So my website for the family therapy is www.thewifefamilytherapy.PLLC.com. You can also reach me at www.missionreadycounseling.com. You know, vets, family members, spouses, you know, we support them all.
Outstanding. And what I'll do as well is when we're done here, I'm going to get all that information. So when I do post this, I'll be able to put those links with this podcast. So if there's somebody out there that is indeed struggling or knows somebody that is struggling, they can reach out to you directly for.
Awesome.
And you know, my goal here is hopefully we can reach the hearts and minds of millions, you know, and start to heal those folks. You know, I know through your own personal experience, there's been so much peace and joy that has been robbed from you. And I know there's millions of others out there that have that same thief that's coming into their hearts and in their minds in the form of post-traumatic stress. So we need to put an end to it, and we need to put an end to veterans and first responders. There's so many there's so many resources in 2024, and people need to tap into those. So again, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today, Christina. We sincerely appreciate everything you have done and continue to do in the military and veteran community. Your service, sacrifice, and dedication to our great nation is truly admirable, and you are serving. And I want you to know that.
Thank you so much.
Folks, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the program. It has never been easier to listen to this podcast. We're on Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, TikTok, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Simply search Today with Tally. Also, learn more about me and my personal story, and perhaps even get my new book at BrianTally.com. That's BrianTally.com. Folks, remember to stay inspired, stay encouraged, stay motivated, and always stay in the fight. Until next time for the Today with Tally podcast, this is Brian Tally. Good night. Semper Fi. God bless.
This is the Today with Tally podcast.